Thank you for coming tonight. It's a terrible night outside, I guess. Pretty miserable. I'm Ellen Safely. I'm the Dean of McDermott Library, and I get the privilege of introducing our Chess Educator of the Year this evening. I'm going to have a few words. I'm going to show a video clip if the media gods are with me, and then you're probably going to listen to him for an exciting talk. So McDermott Library had a long history with the chess team, almost from the beginning. And tomorrow, they're playing blindfolded chess in the lobby. Simultaneously, one person will play several people at one time, not being able to see the board. I find that astounding, because I can't even remember where my keys are in the morning. Tonight, I'd like to welcome Dr. Jeff Bulington. He received a doctorate from Purdue in education with the title Chess at Play, A School Teacher's Narrative of Chess Curriculum and Social Mobility. I thought that was pretty interesting. He is the lead teacher of the Southwest Mississippi Chess Foundation in Franklin County, Mississippi. So I don't know much about Mississippi, so I decided to look it up. And Franklin County, his foundation is located, I believe, in Meadville. That didn't mean anything to me. So then it's near the Homochitto National Forest. Again, nothing for me. And then supposedly it's east of Natchez. So I have been to Natchez. I hope you have too. It's a lovely part of the country, but a highly unlikely location, in my opinion, as to why they would have a chess program there. So he's going to talk about that tonight. I was given some wonderful information by Jill McDermott from my staff about how he became involved with chess. And then I decided to look at that thing called the internet. And I found a wonderful short video from CBS News, and Debbie Montgomery from my staff got me permission to show that to you tonight. And again, if I play my cards right, this will play. So let's go with that. It's about a 5-minute video.
Overtime editor Ann Silvio talks with Sharon Alfonsi.
Does that happen every day?
Yes.
It does. I am a Mississippi girl. I went to school in Mississippi. Someone called me and said, hey, there's this amazing story happening in Franklin County. And I said, where's Franklin County? I didn't know where it was, and I thought I knew every part of Mississippi. But Franklin County is this quiet little county, 7,000 people, and you might miss it unless you know it was there.
Franklin County is one of those places where if you're an out-of-towner, you're going to be spotted pretty quickly. I'm Laura Dodd. I'm a co-producer on this piece.
What do you do here for fun?
Play chess.
Dr. Jeff Bulington, who is the centerpiece of this story, came down from Memphis, Tennessee, and brought chess to a county that had never really heard of chess much before.
So everybody say, checkmate.
Checkmate. What was the reaction in town when he arrived?
It's really cute. One of the stories I love is he came to town to teach chess, and he was crossing the street one day.
And a guy in an SUV stops in the middle of the street, gets out of the car and walks across toward me and says, I know everybody in this town, but I don't know you. And I said, oh, I told him who I was. He said, oh, I'm the mayor.
Here's this stranger coming in, nobody really knows who he is, to teach their kids chess. Everybody thought, like, what is this guy about?
But he's got a plan.
He has a plan for these kids, and I think it's to show them so much more than chess.
We're using chess to open some doors and to help people maybe see themselves in a way they didn't see themselves before.
Queen takes H3. No.
No, it says that answer is wrong.
But let's look at it.
What made you decide that you wanted to play?
I kind of had an interest, just knowing how to move the pieces, things like that. But then it started getting competitive, and I wanted to be the best.
Part of the reason they're so good at the game is one of the things you get good at if you're from the South, or especially if you're from Mississippi, is things just go a lot slower, right? You take your time, and those kids will sit at a chessboard and they'll take their time. and they'll think, and they just take a minute. And I think it makes them great chess players. Is it hard to focus for 2 hours?
Not for me, not at all. I don't remember the longest game. I think it was around like 3 hours or and a half.
You're in the zone.
I like to call it chess dimension.
Chess dimension.
Last night, Daniel suffered a difficult and unnecessary loss.
Queen takes A8, and then I miss this move.
And Dr. B thinks if you keep winning games, you're not getting better. That when you lose, you get better.
It doesn't matter if I win or lose right now. It just matters how hard I play and how much I give a fight.
Because it teaches them. You learn from every single game. You learn when you lose. When you win, you don't examine your games in the same way. What does he tell you about how you should behave after you've won or lost?
Poker face.
Yeah, I was about to say that.
Poker face after the game.
Mm-hmm.
What does he say?
He says that like our own mother should normally not be able to tell whether we won or lost.
The tournament's over, and you're watching from a distance. You have no idea what's going on the board. And the kids come down this long hallway, and they're walking to you, and you're staring at their faces. Like, did they win? Did they lose? You want to know. You're just anxious for any information. And the kids, poker face. I can see you making sure they don't take themselves too seriously after winning.
Yeah, right.
Because I think that it's too easy to draw cheap conclusions about how good you are from winning one particular game, yeah. And you can also do damage to another person. You don't want to do that.
Is Dr. B trying to teach more than just chess?
Dr. B is definitely trying to teach them more than chess.
You may begin.
He's teaching them they can compete with anybody. He's teaching them to be graceful when they win and just as gracious when they lose. He's teaching them to have quiet confidence. He's clear with them. You're going to be underestimated, probably because where you're from, and that's okay. Use that to your advantage. Surprise people.
Congratulations, Dr. B. Come on up.
Thank you. And thank you for having us here. My wife and I have very much enjoyed our day here at UT Dallas. I want to put on, and thank you for showing that clip. I hadn't seen it in a long time, and those kids now don't look like that anymore. I want to start by trying to put this whole project in a different kind of context. Context out of which I came. And there's an academic component to this, which I think is important. I think that those of us in chess education are oftentimes somewhere out on the periphery of the academic world, and there are ways in which particularly whenever issues of budgetary support come up, you get told that, well, chess really isn't part of our world, even though it surely should be. And my background happens to be in philosophy of education. And interestingly, I share a point of connection with Alexei Rooks, whose work in chess and curriculum I think is of great importance for chess in the United States and beyond. And the particular point of connection is a man named LOREN SCHMIDT. LOREN is a FIDE master and a professor of philosophy and English literature. And LOREN taught Alexei when she was a girl, and later LOREN moved to Indiana to attend Purdue University, where he did a PhD in philosophy. And I was young enough that I was still in high school when LOREN was at Purdue, but he would show up and beat everybody, and he was the coach of the best team. And I also heard rumors that he was a philosopher, which that sounded interesting, although I had no real idea what that might mean. He became
to me, kind of a mystery, because I didn't really get to know him all that well. But I knew that he'd written a dissertation in philosophy, and later, when I was a graduate student in philosophy at Purdue, some of the professors, when they found out about my interest in chess, said, hey, this guy named LOREN SCHMIDT wrote a dissertation on chess that you should read. And I did. And LOREN's work is it's a kind of lost treasure in the world of academia and chess. He comes out of the field of phenomenology, and he's interested in asking the question in his dissertation. He asks the question, how does the skilled performer in any field become such? And in particular, he focuses on chess players, because he himself was such a strong player. And in answering that question, I think that he really pointed the way to a lot of important things that we all could stand to think about as we engage in projects like, for instance, the one that I'm currently engaged in Mississippi. So the title of my talk tonight is Chaos and Order, and that hits on several different levels, right? Both in terms of, we'll be thinking tonight about a child encountering the chessboard for the first time. You won't learn any chess from me tonight. I probably don't have any to teach most of you. But as far as thinking about a child encountering a chessboard for the first time and how we might orient children, particularly in school context, towards becoming chess players, we may have something useful to say about that. Chaos and order, well, if you think about it, when you first encounter the chessboard and you're trying to make some kind of sense out of it, it's not so easy to do. In fact, frankly, it's impossible, right? It's not something that immediately makes sense to us. And what I'm interested in talking about is how we can help bring a bit of order to children's experiences of that. But I also want at the same time to think about chess teachers, particularly people who are not chess players, who are thinking about becoming chess teachers, or even people who are perhaps very strong chess players but have never taught beginners before. The ways in which that situation becomes chaotic and the role of order in helping make those kinds of things understandable or feel doable to students. So throughout the course of my talk, there'll be some block quotes that I'll have up from various people, and my idea here tonight is just to move us towards thinking about chess in a more of a philosophical manner, and particularly drawing on the fields of phenomenology, existentialism, and pragmatism. So first, this is from LOREN, and this is where I'll start and this is where I'll end. One of LOREN's insights in his dissertation. The title of the dissertation is Moments of Vision, Rule Breaking, Rule Creation, and Rule Use in Meaning Systems. The circle of understanding leads from routine to creativity and back again to routine. And in LOREN's dissertation, he was interested in asking how someone becomes a chess master. My interest in his dissertation is the early part of that. How does someone even become a competent chess player? Not how does someone become a chess master. But LOREN, in his dissertations, takes us from, we say, okay, we encounter this board, this world of chaos, this chaotic data that's in need of interpretation, and we make sense of it by learning these. First, we learn how the pieces move, the sort of constituent rules of the game. But then we start learning routines, things like controlling the center, getting our pieces active, king safety, simple things like that. And then later we realize that even doing those things are not enough, and there's some new thing that challenges us and moves us ahead as a player. He then takes it on again. He moves up towards moves into the history of chess and uses. This is not something I'll talk about tonight, but perhaps a not completely fair dichotomy between, for instance, Tarrasch and Wijgerden, one being a master of routine, right? A chess player who simply plays not to lose and who follows sort of an algorithmic approach to chess versus someone who plays creatively. And LOREN then goes on to distinguish between an authentic master and a master of routine in chess, and how one in some ways or another transcends the other. But that won't be my concern tonight, because I'm concerned with simply getting things started. But I wanted you to have that little bit of background. Now, here's Loren's basic question. How does a chess player develop his or her skill? In large part, he or she acquires skill through the feedback, sometimes almost immediate, to his or her moves, and equally to the understanding and interpretations on which he or she bases those moves. Without that response and the consequent interchanges that it initiates, we can learn nothing about the worth of our understanding and interpretation. Of course, those encounters with phenomena, moves in chess, suggesting a different interpretation, provide this opportunity most dramatically and effectively, for my interpretation is less likely to change given positive reinforcement. That is, the approach is, if this works for me, I'm going to keep doing it. So you run through, everybody's seen a child discover Scholar's Mate and then think, wow, it's over. I can beat anybody. Which was exactly that was my own personal experience. When I learned how to play in Ohio, I discovered Scholar's Mate and I could beat all my kids. And I was like, well, this game is boring. It's so easy. And then I moved to Indiana, rural Indiana, where I had the good fortune, believe this or not, to me it was good fortune. It was a wonderful thing that happened. I met a D player named Earl Raver. He was a farmer. He stood up in church one Sunday and said it was a beautiful day for a game of chess. And I thought, okay, another Scholar's Mate victim. And I went to his house, and I'll never forget this. I played, first of all, I had the game pictured in my head. I was white, and he was going to get checkmated on F7. But then he does this thing I've never seen before. He puts two pawns behind his back. And I pick black, so that throws me off. And then the next thing, he plays E4, I play E5, he plays Queen H5. I'm like, wait a minute, I know this. And he plays Queen H5, and I'm like, I better get his queen out of here. I play G6. He takes my pawn on E5, my rook on H8 is forked. I'm dead, and my face is beet red. I'm embarrassed. But this is what Loren's talking about here, right? I just got some important feedback about my vision of the chessboard, right? It was just refuted completely and absolutely, right? And I didn't like it. But it disturbed me in a way that was good, for me at least, because I couldn't believe it. Somehow I thought, in school I get told how smart I am all the time, and this guy's a farmer. Surely he can't beat me in chess. Well, I find out, it turns out farmers can be pretty good. And not only can they be pretty good, but they can beat you not just that time, but the next time and the next time again. And so I got to the point where I was riding my bike to his house whenever I could, or he would come pick me up, and he would beat me, probably 100 times. And I kept going back for more because of my disbelief and my idea that there's got to be some way to beat this guy. And so finally, unfortunately, and this is one of the great pains in my heart of my relationship to him, was he let me win. Which it really disturbed me that he let me win, because when I found out that, it sort of undermined my sense of achievement. But later I got good enough that it didn't matter anymore. I could just beat him. And he then told me that if I didn't let him win the next time we played, that he would never play me again. And being a 15-year-old, I just, well, okay, you're never going to play again. And I won again. It didn't deter me a bit. But the point is here, I think, that Loren's point here that's so important, so fundamental to any kind of chess project, whether you're a grandmaster or a beginner, is having your interpretation of the board challenged and being compelled to see something new in the position. Everybody has to experience that. And this doesn't just apply to chess. It applies to chess teachers. In fact, it applies to any field, any skilled field. But in particular with chess teachers, I think it's important that chess teachers who develop routines and ways of approaching their classroom experience ways in which their routines don't work and learn to create new routines so that, like Lasker says in his manual of chess, right? If you're there and you stay there, you're basically you're dead in terms of your growth, right? You've stopped growing, you've started dying, and that's an important point to have in mind. So
when I headed to Franklin County, Mississippi, I had this idea very much in the front of my mind. And I went to a place that there was no formal chess background there at all. I had resources, which were important, financial resources, other resources, community support, and so forth. And I wanted to see, and I still am trying to see, the ways in which this notion of a diverse community of feedback can make children who are in some ways culturally isolated, how that can be brought to bear on their improvement as chess players, right? The ways in which they can engage in a critical dialogue with the history of chess, with current chess players all around the country, and so forth. So that, you know, playing chess in a little bubble, what you get is what I got as a kid. You get a plateaued player somewhere around the B player that I was, the B player that I am today. That's how that sort of plateau happens. Okay. Now, John Dewey, the great American pragmatist, said, and this is an important thing to think about in terms of teaching chess, I think, the practically important question concerns the conditions under which the teacher could really be the leader of a social group. And this happens, right, you know, here at UT Dallas, you have the leader of your chess team. You have in a classroom, you have the classroom teacher who's the leader, right? Or when you're engaged in teaching teachers to teach chess, like Alexi is, again, you have the leader. What does the leader need to know? He says the first condition goes back to his own intellectual preparation and subject matter. It must cover collateral points so that the teacher can take advantage of unexpected questions or unanticipated incidents. It must be accompanied by a genuine enthusiasm for the subject that will communicate itself contagiously to pupils. And I hired my next door neighbor. I needed an assistant, and I hired my next door neighbor who knew how to move the pieces and how to checkmate. He was probably the strongest player in Franklin County when I moved there. And someone asked him later, what's it like teaching with him? And he said, well, it's kind of crazy. He'll tell me that we're going to do something tomorrow, and then the next thing I know, we're doing something completely different. Because in the course of teaching a lesson, right, something pops up in a game that needs to be addressed right then and there, or at least it's the natural way in which to do it. And so that kind of planning has to be left a little bit open. And if, you know, the more the teacher knows, perhaps the better that kind of lesson can go. All right. Now, the other point that Dewey makes that's so important is, why does the teacher need to know this much chess? However much that is. In my dissertation, those of you that have looked at it, I keep using the very, and purposely, vague term, good enough, because that's how good a chess coach or teacher needs to be, is good enough. And that of course changes from circumstance to circumstance, right? You might be good enough in one classroom, but not nearly good enough in another. He says the reason this is the case, that they must have this, is that their mind must be free to observe the mental responses and movements of the student members of the group. In other words, the problem of the pupils is found in the subject matter. The problem of the teacher is what the minds of the students are doing with the subject matter. Unless the teacher's mind has mastered the subject matter in advance, unless he or she is thoroughly at home in it, using it unconsciously without the need of expressed thought, he or she will not be free to give full time and attention to observation and interpretation of the pupil's intellectual reactions. In other words, the teacher's job is to understand the mind of the child or the student as he or she is trying to understand what it is that's being taught, right? So that if the teacher is bogged down in trying to understand the problem himself or herself, their ability to focus on what's going on in the child's head becomes limited, right? It becomes an overload for the teacher. So this is a practical problem. And it's a practical problem that I'm experiencing right now as my students. I'm, you know, like I say, I'm a B player. My students are moving, the highest rated one right now, 2.5 years in, he's about a 1700. He and I played a couple of games. In fact, one of the boys you saw in the video, he and I played 3 games one day. I won 2, he won 1. what happens in those situations is that when he asks me certain kinds of questions, I don't have quick answers for him anymore. I have to say, wait a minute, just give me a minute, and I have to think about those things. And in those ways, our relationship changes, right? I'm not simply the authority. I become more of a, maybe a more skilled study partner or something along those lines. And I have to find someone else to push a child like that farther along than I myself am able to do. And it's important that teachers recognize those limitations of their own and that they find ways to push their students beyond themselves. I always tell my students, if I beat them, it's because I'm a good chess player. If they beat me, it's because I'm a good teacher. So either way I come out smiling. Not really, I hate losing. Especially when they've only been playing 2 years. That doesn't seem fair, but that's how it goes. Okay, now, this is an important thing to keep in mind. The wrong kind of expert, and by the way, you'll see this is written by Karpov, but not Anatoly. This is Yuri Karpov, who's a psychologist rather. Expertise in a subject domain and expertise in teaching this subject domain are two different kinds of expertise. Isn't it quite obvious that a world-class expert in a certain subject domain may be at the same time a very poor teacher in this domain? So it's not just worrying about the teacher taking on chess knowledge they don't have, but it's also a concern about the chess player taking on teaching situations that they're not prepared to understand, right? There's a kind of sweet spot and a kind of overlap of the two that has to be taken into account. I've seen many train wrecks with very strong chess players teaching little children that they have no business teaching. And I think I would think of it as something along the lines of maybe sometimes hiring, unless someone truly has worked on their teaching, which there are many strong players who have and who are great at it. But it's something like hiring a PhD in mathematics to teach first grade math, right? There are ways in which that person's preparation in mathematics does not prepare them to deal with the mind of a first grader, which is a very different kind of animal. Yeah. Okay. Now, Cor van Wijgerden, his work is very, very important to me, and I rely on it a great deal. He's an international master from Holland, and he developed, along with a teacher named Ron Brunia, the STEP method, which some of you probably are familiar with. And one of the things that Cor says over and over again is that he didn't really learn how to, he didn't know how to teach beginners. He had no idea how to do it, and so he went out and found an expert, namely a school teacher, right? Someone who did have an idea so that the two of them together could work through this program in which they would try to get students from complete beginner to somewhere around an ELO of 1800. Now, back to the last point, Cor says, discussing the games of children is not as easy as it might seem. The trainer can make several elementary mistakes when working with beginners. And these can be major problems, and all of these are problems that I myself have experienced. Because you're eager to get them to where you are, but they're not there, and you're wanting them there. It doesn't put them there. You have to help them build a road to this point. We want to improve too many mistakes too soon. We want to improve mistakes that are only relevant at a higher level, and we're using terms and concepts which children at their level cannot understand. So it involves a kind of patience. Otherwise, what you get, you read, like, for instance, Jeremy Silman's somewhat famous book, The Amateur's Mind, right? He talks in the beginning about discovering the fact that his students had bad ideas, right? The math education researchers, Von Hiele, said basically what you have in those kinds of situations is you have a knowing instructor carrying out a monologue in front of someone who may be obediently listening but has no idea what's being said to them, right? And it's not real teaching at all, right? It's just somebody, and someone will say things like, "I couldn't have been clearer," right? What is this kid? What's wrong with this kid? Well, there's nothing wrong with the kid. what's wrong is the way in which the child is being talked to or being asked to do, which they're simply not ready to do yet. Okay, now this is from Dr. Seuss. And this distinction is extremely important, the distinction between play and work. How many times have you heard yourself say, stop playing around, get to work? Right? There's a false dichotomy in our culture which values work higher than play, right? And that indicates that, you know, one should come before the other. And I think this idea is very problematic, especially when it comes to teaching children, because children, and I think Dewey's right about this, they don't see it that way. They don't necessarily experience work as one thing and play as another. He says, for instance, no one has ever watched a child intent in his or her play without being made aware of the complete merging of playfulness with seriousness. And I think when we have that in mind, we can stop. Like, I like asking my kids this question. At some points, they wonder, at first they were wondering, why does he keep asking him this? I will be doing something. I say, are we working or are we playing? And eventually they started saying both. We're working and playing. In fact, we can't really tell the difference. And chess is a way in which, in school, we can bridge that gap or confuse those ideas. In school, of course, is a place where strict boundaries are kept, right? Sociologically speaking, between various content areas, there's school time, there's free time. When I was taught to play chess, my first grade teacher, I think I beat her at checkers and decided that she was going to teach me how to play a better game, she said. And so she took me back to her desk and taught me to play chess. But it was, and that was the only time it was during school time. From that point on, if I was going to play chess, it had to be during recess, after school, something like that. School time was precious and sacred, and you could not waste it playing around, right, with something like chess. And it's very important for those of us that are interested in chess at that level that we not be so quick to accept that dichotomy, that we recognize the value of play and learning and the close interrelation between play and work. Now, so again, Dewey, to be playful and serious at the same time is possible, and it defines the ideal mental condition. James G, by the way, is a game theorist and sociolinguist at Arizona State. For humans, real learning is always associated with pleasure and is ultimately a form of play, a principle almost always dismissed by schools. Now, going back to Loren, I asked Loren to write something here because I know something about the background of Loren's dissertation. Loren was in a classroom with a distinguished professor at Purdue in phenomenology named Calvin Schrag. And they were trying to they were having this conversation about how it is that again, how it is that skilled performers come along, and they were having a conversation. This was in 1979. They were talking about Larry Bird, and they were talking about basketball players. And Schrag knew that Loren was a FIDE master, was a strong chess player, and said to Loren, does this have some application in chess as well? And Loren thought about it and said, well, yeah. And then he started talking to the class about it, and then he ended up writing the dissertation on it. But what was interesting, one of the interesting things to Loren was, until Schrag asked him, he didn't know that it was appropriate to bring chess up in a philosophy class. It wasn't clear to him that it belonged there because it was on the wrong side of the work-play distinction, right? And you'll find this happening over and over again, and it's one of the things that we have to, I think, confront. Anyway, now, this is me teaching kindergartners. This is a first lesson. And some people are comfortable, and I can't imagine it myself, but I hear it works. Lecture kids for an hour the first time they have a chess lesson. They basically say this is a knight, it moves like this. This is a bishop, it moves like this. My opinion is that a child's introduction to chess should be useful, but it also should leave them wanting more, right? You should cut it off before anything like boredom sets in, and you should also not overwhelm them. They should feel like this is not only doable, but this is delightful. And this is an activity I call chaos and order. Okay. Loren says this is important. Again, the idea of the novice performer, when they look at the chessboard, you can say in the ways in which they're not, for instance, in phenomenology, particularly in Heidegger, there's this idea of the they. The they means the ways in which tradition is always looking over your shoulder and telling you, you have to do it this way. There's a kind of orthodox view, right? So there are examples, for instance, of Capablanca saying, for instance, I knew I should have made a different move than the one I did, but I was afraid everybody in the room would laugh at me if I played what I really thought I should play, right? So you sort of succumb to the they, and the they determines in some ways or another your choices for you. Now a beginner, they don't have the they looking over their shoulder, but not in the same way. It's just because they simply don't know what they're doing, right? And so they're lost in a whole different kind of way than someone who has a real vision and is afraid to go out and try it. Now, the next, hopefully this works.
On your mark,
Whoa.
Get set, chaos. You love chaos, so do I. All right, everybody, order.
Notice she starts knocking the other girl's pawns over. We go here from order back to chaos. If you'll see, this is the 7th rank, this is the 2nd, and this girl starts yelling, I'm white, and she's yelling, no, I'm white. So they ended up having a disagreement about that because of their orientation towards the board. But my point here with this lesson is that it's the kind of, it's useful, particularly if kids have never set up a board before, if they don't grow up in houses where there are chessboards and so forth, that they leave there with the sense of, okay, I know the names of all the pieces, I can set up the boards myself, and I got to use my hands a lot, right? So, unlike a situation in which you would just lecture, right, this leaves them very happy to come back, and it's, again, useful information. They can name coordinates and so forth. Now,
on your mark.
Whoop. Now, these two girls are also kindergartners, and they're a little farther down the line. They're beginning to develop a sense of the coordinate grids, be able to use squares and such to find
Go ahead, girls. I want one on G4, good, and I want one on D4.
D. Good game. Where's D4? D4. I put mine on D4. 4's right here. You gotta put. I got me on there.
That's 4, but where's the D?
Can I D's right here. Hey, got the D right D4.
Is that right, Maddie? All right.
Now, those kinds of fundamental and early and you know, very simple successes mean a great deal to children who are coming into chess. What you have a problem with in that kind of situation is children selecting out of chess quickly because they think, I'm not as fast at it as the others are, perhaps for whatever reason, it must not be my game, and they just simply don't come back anymore. What you have to do is build in opportunities for success from the start, and successes that are meaningful and enjoyable. Now,
go ahead. since I'm a little short on time, I'm going to share a couple things. Now, this is from Chess Steps, and it gives you another idea of how to start with beginners. Now, the rook, of course, is the simplest piece of all chess pieces to teach. And I'll prove that in just a second. Of course, pawns and knights are the most difficult. Here you can see this child has a very good idea, and this is a worksheet that all children would get after having a lesson at a demo board in which we're told, you know, rooks move vertically and horizontally. Now look what happens when the child, after a demonstration at the board, gets introduced to the bishop. We might think that telling them the bishop moves on the diagonal and showing several times would do us some kind of good, but in fact what we get is this somewhere in between thinking it's a rook and a bishop, right? And it's only by getting this kind of feedback to the teacher that the teacher can give quality feedback to the student, because otherwise you're going to ask, do you know how bishops move? And they're going to say yes, but in fact they do not. They have not mastered it yet. And so we need to be able to to know how they're doing, so that this kind of early feedback is absolutely essential to their success, right? And we need to be able to take them back to these points. And then after the, you know, you tell them, okay, a rook is a queen plus a bishop. So here's what we get. A reasonable but wrong answer, right? We've got horizontal moves, we've got diagonal moves, but there's something wrong here. We have a Z. Now, the last few points I want to make, and this goes back to James G. About he by the way doesn't study chess. He studies video games, and he asks, why is it that certain video games succeed? But it's remarkably relevant to chess. Good games do not at all points operate at the outer and growing edge of the player's competence. This is why they also recognize in another important learning principle, what I call the principle of expertise. When learners learn a new skill of set strategy, they need to practice it over and over in varied contexts in order to make it operate at an almost unconscious, routinized level. And here, of course, what we need, going back to the child's understanding of the bishop and the queen, are opportunities to play with bishops and queens in a meaningful way over and over again until they don't have to think about it anymore, right? Those things are just there at their disposal, just at their fingertips. Same thing with a knight. Now, this is a different element. So there's this element of pushing kids, helping kids master something and develop a sense of mastery of, if it's the mastery of a bishop, right? Like in our group, when a child becomes a horse master, that means that I know that child knows how a knight moves, and it's a big deal to know how a knight moves. Andy Soltis says that that's one of the biggest jumps a chess player ever makes, is from having to do 1, 2, 3 moves to just making a single knight move. Now here, at a lot of moments, a good game feels highly challenging but ultimately doable. Perhaps the player fails a few times at a given task, but good games show how much progress the player has made on each try, and the player sees that this progress is increasing each time he or she fails. Eventually, success comes. This feeling of the game being highly challenging but ultimately doable gives rise to a feeling of pleasurable frustration. Has anyone in here ever felt pleasurable frustration? Do you know what that means? That feeling of, I almost did it, but give me more, right? And that kind of failure is invaluable, right? Because it's a kind of failure that pushes you on rather than thinking, I can't do this, it's impossible. That leads to quitting. This kind of frustration actually pushes you forward and develops what some people call grit in children, right? The idea that you work through it and that there is this kind of payoff in it. Now, how do you do this as a teacher? Well, this involves knowing right where your students are. You really have to, like Dewey was saying, you really have to study what they're ready to undertake, and you have to put them there at the edge of their abilities and keep them there. But you also have to, at the same time, on the other hand,
work on that routinized knowledge that they also have to have. So you're sort of constantly pulled between one and the other. And then here, of course, he's simply saying that at some point, then once you have your strategy down, a good game will mess you up, right? Some new thing will come that completely undermines your thinking. I've got this thing figured out. And of course, is there any game better than chess for doing that, right? It never stops doing that to us. Yeah, at some point, maybe one player in the world reaches that point where they're stronger than everybody else, but otherwise we're always in that boat of having our understanding challenged and being made to rethink it. Now, I'm going to, for the sake of time, I want to go back to that initial comment of LOREN's. The circle of understanding leads from routine to creativity and back again to routine. And I think, again, this is important not only for beginner chess players and later chess players. I mean, it applies to all chess players. But it also applies to chess teachers, that there are ways in which we have routines that we can follow. For instance, Core's step method. It has wonderful teacher's manuals, which basically tells teachers, here's what you do in these situations. Here's what to expect from students. But then a more skilled teacher will take the risk of moving away from that sort of thing and following, going down various rabbit holes they see along the way as they see their children doing something that maybe is problematic or something that's interesting in a position and so forth, and being able to just simply go along with them. Sticking to routine in itself leads to stagnation, right? But trying to be creative at all times leads to a different problem. As Loren also says in his dissertation, he says a player cannot figure out everything at the board for himself or herself because time doesn't permit it, right? We do need the they. We need the tradition of chess knowledge, right, to help us move forward. But on the other hand, we also need to be free to see things in our own way. I had the pleasure of working for several years with Sam Polotnik when he was in Memphis. And Sam always would tell me that a chess master is someone who has realized his or her personality in their chess. They've become their own person as a chess player. And I believe the same thing is true of a chess teacher. And what I hope that Loren's work can help all of us understand as we think about it and talk about it more is how we might move more in that sort of direction and how we might help others do the same, both by providing routines but also opportunities for creativity in schools, something that, frankly, right now, in many cases, needs to be protected. All right, well, I'll stop here for tonight. If anybody has any questions or anything like that, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes, sir?
How did the students progress after they graduated? They continued chess?
Well, none of the students have graduated yet, so that remains to be seen. The program is only 3 years old. There's funding for 10 years for the project, so we'll see how that goes. In the past, many students have continued playing chess, but interestingly, I was talking to one of the deans earlier today and was saying that in the case of students who don't come from backgrounds with certain kinds of cultural resources, that even winning a college scholarship might not guarantee the child a way into college, right? That there may be more involved than simply winning a tournament that leads to a scholarship. There are all kinds of other barriers that get in the way, and I've seen that happen several times. It's a complicated thing, and it really requires that there be a clear pipeline from elementary school chess, the kind of thing that I'm doing primarily, and college, right? That work remains to be done. Of course, UT Dallas is a
a pioneer in that in many respects, but there's still a great deal of work to be done as far as connecting, particularly public schools, to collegiate chess. Yes?
Jeff, could you comment on the motivation of the sponsors of the program? Were they chess players?
Not a chess player. Not a chess player at all. Someone who had a deep commitment to the place and had the resources, but also developed a sense that there was a kind of, I think in his mind, a kind of rigor to chess that was perhaps in some ways lacking in other elements of public education, and that chess would complement it in ways that might prove useful. I think that was a primary drive, and simply a desire to do something to help the community move along. I think that all of those things were the case, right? Yes, sir.
Two-part question. It's about socialization of chess after they begin to get ignited and excited about it.
Mm-hmm.
Does it bring other members of their family into a chess interest? Question. And the other side of it is, as young people, are they engaged in social media discussions and or games electronically? Have you moved into that? Are you using that or trying to get them to avoid it? Or
okay. The answer to your first question is that yes, it does happen, right? And this has always been my experience, particularly if you're working within a single community. Younger siblings come into chess class already knowing things, and you're always, it's a pleasant surprise, right? You just see somebody doing something you don't expect, and that happens. But also, there's also sometimes, particularly when the younger sibling sort of outstrips the older one, it can also bring somebody's career to a screeching halt because they don't want to lose to younger siblings. They consider it embarrassing, and then they say, well, I let you win, and then I never wanted to play anyway, and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. Your second question about social media, I think that, let me put it this way, the issue, the point I was making about routine, when I went to Meadville, I was probably one of 3 people that knew how to move a knight in the county, and I was the only one that was working in the schools. So when you're walking through the room and everybody's tugging on your sleeve, and they want to know, am I being cheated? Is this how this thing really moves? And you're the only one that can answer the question, it's overwhelming. And so having something like a computer that says illegal move for you, that's like, great. It resolves those kinds of things. But on the other hand, the kind of feedback that students need to progress as chess players, I don't think can ever come through a computer, at least not as I understand computers today. They might complement. Computers can be very, like, for instance, we use Chess Kid, and we focus mostly, I pay attention to their puzzles scores, right? How well they're doing on their tactics, because you can go back and check and see any problem that they missed, go back and review it and see what kinds of themes are causing them trouble and that sort of thing. So in those ways, that kind of feedback is very useful. But in other ways, it seems to still it's just good old-fashioned teaching, and also facilitating a community where they're giving each other feedback. Where, like, the other day, it was just one of those delightful moments as a teacher where one of my students beat another one in a rated tournament, and then announced afterwards, "Yeah, I knew you were going to play that on move 8. You always play that when we play speed, and I've been thinking about it at home, and I had this other idea, and I waited. I didn't tell anybody about it until this tournament." Great. Wonderful. Yes, sir?
I've noticed that thing with the siblings, too. I have it in one of my clubs right now. The wonderful thing is the sister is 1 grade lower than the brother. And I've really built up the idea of, wow, you are a marvelous trainer, using the same logic you are using as far as with your students. And that's working so far. So he's still in there, and he's still on Chess Kid. He's still like 3 levels ahead of her, but she's moving up fast, and she actually had the same score that he did in the tournament and all that. So I was going to ask you.
Parents are the ones that go down the hardest and the fastest.
Oh, man. Well, my first goal is always, you will beat your father. Yeah. This is going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, parents come in and say,
she beat me. I'm like, of course she did.
She knows how to play.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I was going to ask you, how do you maximize that interaction with one student training another student, the interaction between pairs, perhaps, in your classes?
Well, I think that some of that is useful and it can build up someone's esteem. But I also think that I don't think, in general, I don't think children should be raising children or responsible for other children's educations. And so if that becomes their task, right, if my task becomes teaching my sibling or some other person and and my own chess falls off. I mean, someone asked me, how good are you at chess? And I say, well, not as good as I was when I got to Meadville, right? Because my skills have undoubtedly deteriorated over the last 3 years because I've not had time to play a serious game with anybody, and I'm sure that I'm not as good as I was when I got there. I'm probably a better teacher than I was, but I'm surely a weaker chess player for it.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you that too, as a plateaued player, there is a conflict between your own development of chess and that.
That's right. It's only when they catch you and then perhaps inspire you to say, wait a minute, I'm not done here yet, and then to try to keep up for a while longer. But it's a losing battle on some level, right?
But you did say you had some interaction.
Oh, very much so. And there are children that are kids that are very loving towards each other and want to have their siblings succeed. There's a lot of that kind of thing, but it's not I just wouldn't say that's sort of a one-size-fits-all answer to that issue. There are some families, and it has to do with family dynamics. Some families are profoundly competitive, and some are not. Those that are, it can be for a while it can be wonderful because you just see them going at each other, but then at some point one of them just says, wait a minute, I can't keep up anymore. I think I'm going to start shooting baskets again.
Dr. We'll probably take one more question before we present you with the award.
Sure, that's fine. Yes, sir?
Yeah, from one chess teacher to another, want to get your advice on this. Say you're toward the end of a chess lesson. Some decent intermediate chess players, but say it's an end game where it's a known grandmaster theory.
What do you mean by intermediate?
Oh, those are way beyond beginner. They've gone to a few chess tournaments.
I see. Okay.
And a chess rating.
Okay.
Below 1,000. So, what do you do when you're at the end of the chess lesson? It's a king of pawn for king end game, it's a known draw. Mm-hmm. Okay. You say it's a grandmaster draw. You want kids to go to chess games. That's where the fun is, all right? And half the class's hands raised and say, that is not a draw. What do? Do you allow the Star Wars Skywalker rebellion to rise against the evil galactic Grandmaster Empire?
I don't understand your question. I understood it up to the point where you started talking about Star Wars and you lost me.
I'm just curious what you do as a teacher when half the class, half class says that they disagree with Grandmaster theory.
Well, of course. Well, first of all, I wouldn't tell them that in the first place. I mean, what grandmasters know in that situation is irrelevant, right? What matters is what can you do in this situation, right? And we were looking at a position just the other day with advanced players, and it was a complicated rook. It was a Rubinstein ending with rook, pawns, king, and one of my kids said, "Why are we looking at this? This is obviously one for white." And then an hour later, "My goodness, is this hard?" Right? He said that. So even the ones who say they do know, I would make them prove it. Right? I mean, it's whether they think they know it or not may not really in the end be all that important. What really matters is do they know it and can they do it? Right? It's important to avoid, I think, the notion, particularly with beginners or anybody that I work with under 2000, that they not get this idea that there is something called a theoretical draw. Therefore, we don't need to play this out. It's absurd, right? No, they do need to play it out because they don't know it, they don't understand it, and simply calling it a theoretical draw is, I think, useless. I think they need to struggle through those positions and be made to prove it, or they'll just lose out on so many opportunities. So I would encourage to make them play those out and to really learn them. Yeah. Okay. Should I go sit down? Oh. All right. Well, thank you.
I can take it. The University of Texas at Dallas recognizes Dr. Jeff Bulington. What an honor to meet you. How enthusiastic you are and your vision for teaching. I learned a lot, and I don't know much about chess. On behalf of all of that and the people that are involved with our chess program, thank you for coming, and congratulations.
Thank you all very much.
I asked if there was a check, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it.